Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming today. I'm Francis Rose from Federal News Radio, and I want to thank Government Executive for putting on EIG this year, and I want to thank Graduate School USA for inviting me back. I apparently didn't screw up last year's conversation sufficiently. They wanted to give me another chance to do it this year, so my thanks to Grace Schiraldi and the folks from Graduate School for doing that. We're going to talk in this panel about training and ways that agencies can do training more effectively given the budget times that we're in. And rather than a whole lot of eloquent words about things that you already know all about already because you're living it, I want to introduce to you the folks who are going to speak with us today. Pat Hoban Moore is the new Chief Administrative Officer at HUD, and congratulations on your promotion.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pat.
Yay.
She is the 2013 Deming Award winner, so for a couple more hours at least, she's the defending champion. And I congratulate you on that and encourage you to enjoy it while you got it, because we'll...
Fame is fleeting.
Mike Casey is the Chief Learning Officer at the General Services Administration, and we just came from a terrific presentation by your big boss. And look forward to your insights, too. And Al Tyree is Director of Business Relations and Learning Solutions at Graduate School USA. Al, I want to start with you because you have the outside government perspective here, and people come to you and say, what ideas can you share with us to help us get around the issues that we're dealing with? What do you answer them when they give you that question?
What do you need? Actually, when I think about that, I think about, and we were talking about the future of government training, I think about how things have changed in the last year. And generally, there's this expectation when agencies, organizations come to us for training that you're providing more than just this static instructor-led training event, looking for content that's being delivered in a variety of formats, that's more collaborative, that's delivered in a way in that more social in nature. So I think that's the biggest thing, is trying to see in what ways we can kind of repurpose that content so that it meets the needs of the agency.
Mike, I did an interview recently on the program with a vendor that was going overseas and was starting a practice in his area of specialty with a government that was completely starting from scratch.
Wow.
And it caused me to think about this subject, getting ready to come and talk to you folks. If you were starting a learning practice inside an agency completely from scratch, given what Al just talked about the idea of an instructor standing in front of a classroom of X number of people being outdated now, what are the tools that you would want, and how would you want to be able to use them to convey information to people so that they receive them well?
Sure. First off, most of what we're trying to deal with are people problems. And technology isn't going to solve those problems for us, but it may help us develop the skills we need to solve them ourselves. In some ways at GSA, it's almost like we are starting from scratch when it comes to training and development, because we had been on hold for a year and a half as we sorted out the things that got us into trouble not that long ago that everybody in here is pretty familiar with. That's pretty cool in some ways. In other words, where we had those lemons, we're making lemonade. So one of the things that can hold us back as we try to evolve over time is the baggage for all the previous way that we saw how to do things. And this is an opportunity, and the example that you gave us there of someone going overseas and starting fresh, it's a chance to look at things with a new set of eyes and hopefully asking a different set of questions. If we ask the same questions, no surprise, we're going to get the same doggone answers. And so this is a chance to be asking different questions. And I would argue that one of those things, one of the changes that we need to make is to stop thinking about training and start talking about learning, and very quickly get to where what's really important, which is performance, becomes the center of this. One of the reasons why I came to GSA is because we have a chief learning officer, and if I'm successful at my job in a couple of years, I'll be the chief performance officer. It's moving in that right direction. Not that long ago, I saw where someone had written about the kind of person that we need in the federal government these days, and it's someone who is comfortable being uncomfortable. Well, we should all be uncomfortable. The ground is shifting under our feet. We have lots of things going on over which we don't have control. But the things that we can control, and primarily ourselves in the way we look at problems, that gives us a real leg up on those things.
What's the significance, Pat, of what Mike said about transitioning from a training culture to a learning culture?
Well, there are several things that are very important in that, and I agree. One is that agencies have to really strip down in these days of accountability and be very true to their mission. But they also have to then have their strategic plans and responsibilities as articulated in job descriptions or whatever is going to replace job descriptions in the future. And then understand how we're going to measure results, not just outputs or putting boxes, checking off boxes. And I think for people who have been in the federal workforce or in the workforce period for a long time, that was a comfort that we had, we no longer have. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that's so important about that is it recognizes that our workforce today does not look like it's going to look 3 years from now. And Mr. Tangarini spoke about that in terms of how we're going to look. But the truth of the matter is that our workforce, at least in my agency and many agencies, the two largest groups of employees we have are people who have less than 5 years of service and people who have more than 25 years of service. So diversity and what the group that I started, the under 5, what they teach us and what we have to learn in order to tie mission to results and outcomes. That's what the taxpayers expect, and that's certainly what the mood of the Hill is.
If your agency's experience is common also, you've got a situation where those under 5 people are not necessarily in the same age cohort.
No.
You have a lot of folks coming in at various points throughout their life, chronological ages, and not just their career tenures.
That's correct. And the other thing that's important about that is that they're bringing certain expectations to the workforce that our more tenured people aren't necessarily have experienced. And space and workspace is one of them, but the whole idea that we have people who are very tenured with the agency who basically came to work and that was their life. This group of people who is joining the federal workforce right now, we're very fortunate because we've had a soft employment market. We've been able to attract remarkable talent with our more tenured people. We have to make those two come together, experience and the new skills. But then we also have to train our managers or help our managers learn how to manage in a new way. Because the sort of alpha male or female manager is not going to be the manager of the future.
From the perspective of somebody who does the training and helps managers understand the training, Al, what's the implication for that transition from a training environment to a learning environment that we're talking about?
Yeah, we have certainly seen the shift, particularly in my role where I work with agencies in developing training solutions. And it's been a dramatic shift from, say, agencies just kind of scrolling through our catalog and pulling something off the shelf. Where appropriate, they're looking for us to obviously to be a learning consultant, to work with them collaboratively, to be subject matter experts or to provide subject matter experts, all in helping them define and understanding their requirements, leading to the right learning solution. And for us at the graduate school, I think it's also about being public service champions and understanding that as budgets go, training doesn't have to go, but mission certainly doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm. Mike, we've all gotten on to, I think each of us has said the word outcomes or results at some point during this conversation already. Measuring outputs is easy in training. X number of people took this and checked off that they've gone all the way through it. But the results or outcomes completely different. What are some of the state-of-the-art things that you see people doing, not just at GSA, but across government, in being able to measure that people are incorporating the information that they learned into doing their jobs better?
If we can build the measurement of training effectiveness into the training that we deliver, and if we can create the kind of culture among the folks that are training themselves and gravitating to the opportunities that they have, they're going to measure those things for us. and all we have to do is track it. Maybe a good example of that might be a mentor program. You know, the traditional way of looking at mentoring is you find out who needs a mentor, who thinks they need a mentor. You find someone who's willing to do that. You put them together. You do this match. And then some number of years go by, and maybe you're able to find out whether or not this is a good mentoring relationship or it isn't. But where we're headed, all of that's going to be out there. You know, think LinkedIn, think Facebook. Well, that's how mentoring is going to work. And so people will be going after the mentor support that they need right now. You just became a new supervisor. It probably would be worthwhile for me to find someone else who's an experienced supervisor. I have the information I need to reach out, find that person right now, get the support that I need right now, and 3 weeks from now, when I've survived my first couple of weeks on the job as a supervisor, I'm beyond that. And the same kind of thing, the same dynamics will be going on with the training. So one of the paradigm shifts is that we don't have to train everyone to become a leader. Not everyone is going to be an SES. But if we can identify, you know, I don't know if you're familiar with the book Freakonomics, but the new one is coming out about thinking like a freak. And so
many jokes there.
Oh, you know it.
But could be my biography.
But one of the things that they're going to be pushing in there is the idea to you grow a garden that weeds itself. In other words, people will gravitate to what they need if you can make the information and those opportunities available to them. So then you don't have to be the world's smartest people administering these programs. You create it in a way that people can go get what they need and tell you whether or not it's working.
Pat, it almost sounds like crowdsourcing learning on some level.
Absolutely. And I really believe that we are going to, not even 5 years from now or 3 years, will not understand learning the way we have traditionally known it. I'm part of a group at HUD that's working on what are in our fundamental mission delivery, what are the skills, the basic skills that we have to have. And they go in about 4 or 5 different categories because we have a very diverse mission. But when we define them, then we tried to build, our chief learning officer tried to build it around those skill sets. If I were the queen for the day, which fortunately the HUD does not let me do that, I would put every new employee through all those skill sets, and then either they can self-select or they will have that opportunity to use those skills in the future, like some of us who have done 6 or 7 jobs through their career in different places. I tell the Secretary of HUD there are 5 jobs I can't do. I can't be an accountant. I cannot be an architect because I don't have the credentials. I can't be a lawyer because, I mean, the lawyers in our shop accuse me of practicing law without a license all the time anyway. But I have no credentials for that. And I can't be the Secretary of HUD. But I can be smart enough to hire the people who have all the skills that I don't have and then encourage them and nurture them. But I also cannot be the type of manager that manages by fear and intimidation, because those people are managers of the past.
Little multiple choice test for you. The future of training in government 5 years from now. A, relies in demonstrating return on investment in the money you're already spending now or hoping for bigger budgets. B, recognizing that you'll have less money to work with and figuring out how to do it. C, both of the above, or D, none of the above. Al, you want to go first?
Well, I know that B has been with us since the beginning of time and just doesn't look to be going away, so certainly all of the above.
Okay. Why do you think that the return on investment piece in the A part of that will be so important? Just because of the budgets going down?
Well, primarily, I mean, you're working with less, but you still have to, again, stay true to your mission to try to maintain the quality of programming that sometimes comes with a premium. So you want to make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck, if you will.
Full disclosure, I don't know which of the answers is correct. I'm relying on them. Mike?
I suppose I would say all of the above, but a lot of it has to do with how we define investment.
Okay.
And, industry has already gotten beyond the bean counting, and we're just catching up to the bean counting now in the government. So I'm sure that we are going to have to show a return on monetary investment, but if we can reframe that and talk about the return on expectations, I think we're going to find ourselves on much firmer ground to be able to justify the things that we're doing with the money that we have.
I want to come back to that concept of return on expectations because that kind of turns the money question on its head. But Pat, your answer?
I think it's probably all of the above, but I would also add that we have to look at our money as part of our investment, because part of that is also helping the employees identify what they need, engage them in describing how they understand their jobs, and what are the skills and tools that they need to do that. Because unless you start with the people who are doing the work, you're going to spend a lot of money for things that you may not need, or you can't, in the final analysis, find the value added.
So how collaborative has the learning process been historically in your view, Pat, and how's that changing in the coming years?
Well, I think historically we've done a very traditional model. As we say, get the catalog out, and oh gosh, I haven't had that, or I'd like to get this certificate. We went through a period where we had 200 employees become certified project managers, and 77% of them never used it again. So we have to look at what that cost and what was the value of it. But I think what we're going to face in the future is a whole different way, not only as these gentlemen have described, but I think people are going to self-select pretty quickly because they're not going to stay in one job or one place or even with the federal service for a long time. And so we're going to have to look at ways that we can try to equip people with what they need in terms of a specific skill or training. And then as people also select, I don't want to be an SES because it's too much work and the money's not that different, or I don't want to be a leader because I hate managing people, and there's a lot more of that going on. We have a number of the folks who are just coming into federal service who really don't want to manage. They want to be on teams, so we have to look at even the definition of what leadership and manager and training is and start dismantling that whole complement of training as well.
Mike, how is that disruption changing the way that your agency and others across government should be thinking, maybe aren't yet, but should be thinking about how training will look in 3 to 5 years?
Again,
I'm sorry.
Sure.
I'm still getting the hang of that.
But I think it's by asking the right questions. If you're going to measure the effectiveness of a leadership development program, one way is to say, well, how much did we spend this year? How can we get the same output next year for a little bit less? Aha, we've proved a return on investment. Whereas the question really ought to be, why do we have a leadership development program? And while we ask that and we peel the onion, it's because we need 5 people a year to become SESs internally or something like that. If that's the expectation at the highest level, why in the world would we pump 75 people through an ELDP? And that's because we never asked the right questions. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And so then it's much easier to make the argument if your agency chief can say, you know what, I paid for leadership development and you met my expectations, problem is solved. The money will flow to that.
Mm-hmm. Al, you're in the business of working with these agencies and helping them figure out what the right questions are. When you talk to folks, are they coming with the right ideas in mind, or are there times where you have to sit down with somebody and say, you're not even headed down the right path for the outcomes that you want on the other end?
Yeah, I think it varies from discussion to discussion. I think a lot of times you speak with agencies who don't really know what they don't know. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I referred earlier to and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. I mean, we're serving as your consultant, your advisor, your learning professional. So to help frame that conversation and to help them discover those answers. And they kind of know them, they're there. We just like to help them frame the question so they can get to that place a little quicker and more efficiently.
We talked about crowdsourcing earlier, and we're going to do that here. In just a moment, we're going to turn it over to you guys because you have these 3 experts here, and I'd like you to have the chance to pick their brains as much as I'm getting to do so. Before we do that, I'd like to take that 5-year idea again and start with you, Pat, and have you tell me what you think the learning environment looks like within an agency in 5 years, and what you think what steps agencies should start taking today to get there.
Well, I started what I call HUD's Under 5 group because we were losing our new hires at a precipitous rate, and I was trying to find ways to retain all this talent that we tried to recruit. But they are now getting ready to turn it over to our next group, and in fact, we have a PMF fair at HUD tomorrow to hope to recruit another 100 PMFs. Not that they're the only group, as you mentioned. We're getting seasoned people, and that's a great combination of talent, which I love. But what we're going to see in 5 years are people who are coming to do a specific task because they like our mission or they want to gain some credentials. But we are not, by and large, going to find people who are going to get their 40 and 50-year and 35-year pins anymore. By and large, that's just not going to happen. And they have to have, I believe we have to have a diverse workforce because we should look like the people we serve. And more in many ways, in age and color and disability and all the other categories. But we also have to understand that they're like, and the Under 5 people, I tell them they're like my children. I'm going to only have them for a short period of time, and then I'm going to say, fly, little bird, get out of the nest and go out and earn your own money. But they are going to have to be people who are flexible, who are facile, who can understand about team management and self-management and going in out of tiger teams or groups or whatever. And they have to have enough technology, understanding that they're going to be able to ride that and be willing to be people that will continue to learn. Because if you don't, then you have moribund people who are very much like the first guy that I interviewed years ago, and I asked him, he was having a bad interview, so I said, can you tell me about your 17 years of progressively responsible experience, hoping that I'd throw him a little lifeline. And he said, well, Ms. Hobenmore, I only had 1 year of experience, but I had it 17 times, so.
He didn't get the job, did he? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You implying that was me?
No. You didn't make the big sheet.
Mike, what does that learning structure look like 5 years from now, and what do agencies do between now and then to get there?
I don't think I'm smart enough to know what it's going to look like, because we're hiring the people today that are going to help us build it. Mm-hmm. In the same way that I don't know what Facebook is going to look like or what LinkedIn is going to look like. It will continue to morph, but I know what kind of people we need to be hiring in order to make that happen. And so we're back to culture change again.
Yep.
We're back to seeing lifelong learning and the fact that over the course of your career, you will have to reinvent yourself 3 or 4 or 5 times. And that's not GSA's job or any other agency's job. Our job is to create the conditions under which the right people can do that reinvention and bring themselves back. Otherwise, they'll be dinosaurs, and then we have to have something that's built into the system that shows them the door.
That reinvention idea, Al, it strikes me, is critical. Pat's mentioned it in one form, Mike now in this form. The avenues to that reinvention for people in the future, how will they look different than they are today? Certainly the structure of what learning looks like, where I sit in a room with 30 of my closest friends and listen to somebody lecture for an hour, that model's just about gone.
Sure, and I was thinking about in terms of on our side as providers of training and learning services to the government, I'd like to see more synergistic convenings across government, industry, and academia. Where, and I know some of my compadres on this side say, "Oh, we don't want to give away trade secrets," but I think it's really important and vital that we all kind of come together on our side so we have a better understanding of these drivers that are impacting training. Innovation is certainly the byproduct, as those on the industry side can kind of share best practices, and so it's a holistic view. How realistic, I don't know, but I think anytime you come together as a group, you're better for it. Convenings like EIG, and there are a number of forums across government in industry, I think that serve us well and will continue to in the future.
We have microphones around, I believe, for folks that have questions. And just raise your hand and we'll get going as quickly as we can. This young lady right here in the front will start us off. Tell us who you are and who you're with, if you don't mind, if you can.
My name is Jennifer Bailey, and I'm with the Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Welcome.
Thank you, panelists. My question is, as we've mentioned that training is becoming more outdated, what do you see as the role of coaching as we talk about learning and how we can promote more learning opportunities?
Coaching comes in a variety of forms, too. Sometimes it resembles mentoring, and sometimes it looks like a one-on-one instruction environment. Any thoughts, folks?
Well, I think both coaching and instructing, facilitating are skills that are absolutely indispensable for the leaders of the future here, for this kind of world that we're talking about. And so I wouldn't view coaching as something, as a service that the agency provides. Again, I think that's a perfect example of the kind of thing that we want those skills to be bubbling up all over the place, and let people find coaches when they need them, let people coach when they can to make a difference. Now, there may be some formal programs that we have to have out there. There is going to be a time and a place in some careers where you need to sit somebody down for some executive coaching and help them address something that might be holding them back or something like that. But as we go back and relook how we do onboarding, it's got a coaching component to it. Mm-hmm. As we relook what we do with new supervisors, it has a coaching component to it. As we look at how we do executive leadership development, it has a coaching component to it, not just coaching the people that are going to be new leaders, but developing their skills so they can coach the folks who work for them. So we want it to just permeate the organization if we can do it right.
Pat, how much, I'm sorry, I wanted, please follow on to Mike's comments, but I wanted to ask you too, how much flexibility are you seeing or do you expect to see in being able to identify future leaders who are good at leading and not just necessarily the technical expert who's been there the longest?
I think to answer that question is, I think we're building that flexibility. I don't think organizations, especially federal bureaucracies, are inherently good at that.
Right.
But I think what we're finding out as leadership comes aboard and as the group of folks who don't have a traditional view of bureaucracy come into leadership positions, they're asking some of us to reach out for teams and task forces, and I think those are great opportunities to pilot test people for leadership with a leadership versus a supervisor or manager title. And I think those opportunities are going to have to come more and more as we try to solve problems. But I did, in response in part to my coworker and to what Al said, I have a leader book that's my plan for what I want to do for the next couple years. And one of them is to work my way into obsolescence so that I bring all the other people along so far that I'm just superfluous to the organization. And I do that with a purpose because my next plan is I used to do adjunct teaching till I came up to the bubble here in Washington. And a friend of mine in academia, I used to do adjunct around the Southeastern, he's asked me to come back to be a practitioner in residence at his academic institution. And I think that was originally what the IPA program was created for, to get that cross-fertilization. And I think, unfortunately, has deteriorated a lot and needs to be dusted off. But I also think if we're going to encourage the next gang of leaders that are coming to take my place, and I hope they hurry up and get here. I tell the under 5 group that we started with 3 people who were getting ready to leave HUD, and I encouraged them to stay on. And there are now 350 people in headquarters and out in the field offices. But one of the things I tell them is that in a few years, when I'm at the home for the permanently confused old ladies, I want you guys to be ready to take this sucker over, because I did not want to turn it over to the idiots. And then every year you could come over and say, "Happy birthday, Mom," and I'll be making a potholder. I won't know the difference anyway. So they go, oh, sure, Pat. Oh, that's sure, absolutely. But the truth of the matter is that that's the kind of thing that we're looking for in leadership. Is people who may not want to be a supervisor, may not be a mentor. Yeah, I know how to do that, or yeah, I'd like to learn how to do that, or I'd like to be on a team to do that. And so I think that's what coaching will be about, is to find people who will be the advocates for those people who want to learn, and then find other ways to reward them.
Another question? Right back here. We'll come to you next. Come to you right now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vilma Alejandro. I'm from the Department of Agriculture Farm Service Agency.
Welcome.
Now that we have 4th generation in the workplace, does motivation for learning look differently across generation?
Absolutely. 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 Someone in my organization said, Pat, you keep talking about the under 5 and the PMFs, and they get all the attention, they get all the training. And we have a joke that we say at HUD, and this is actually true. A young man came to work for us, and after 6 months, he went to the chief of staff, and she said, well, how's it going? What do you need? And he said, well, I've been here for 6 months. And she said, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. Well, I graduated from college in 2009, and then I worked on the campaign, and these are some political appointee. And I've been keeping the secretary's book for 6 months, and I think I'm ready for a new job. And she said, well, what do you think you're ready for? And he said, I think I'm ready to be the deputy secretary.
Well, he knew where all the appointments
That's
were.
exactly right. He figured he'd learned everything from
Right.
the book. But the truth of the matter is people aren't going to wait around for 20 years to go from one grade to another. So to answer your question in part is that we have to look at this new way of hiring and encouraging and promoting talent, regardless of when they entered. Because one of my coworkers says, Pat, you came to HUD at the Hoover administration. Well, technically speaking, there was no HUD during the Hoover administration, but short of that. But I have tried to keep current in what I do so that I can be ready for the new task. And it's proven well for me, HUD, because every time I win the Deming Award last year, and now I get a new job, so no good deed goes unpunished. But the truth of the matter is we have to have exactly what you're saying. We have to understand. When one of the supervisors said to me, oh, these darn under 5 kids, these college kids, I think they're so smart. I said, do you have kids? Yes, I do. How old are they? 24 and 27. I said, well, you're the son of a gun that's responsible for raising all these people. It's your fault.
Nobody wanted to hear that.
No, I got a couple of those smart alecks myself that I raised.
Al, the young lady's question about motivation is interesting because it takes us back to that outcome topic, which is the outcome for the agency may not be the same as the desired outcome for the person receiving the learning, who's trying to do the learning. What's the implication for that on what the agency should be thinking about strategy-wise?
Well, yeah, and that's why the learning professional in that agency has to be attuned to the needs of that tech-savvy generation. I bring it back to that because here you have a group that's coming along that wants greater and more immediate access to content. They want it to be more social, not always formal, more engaging and more collaborative. And that in itself, I mean, we have shifted in the last year to move toward a more aggressive converting of our instructor-led training, for example. We've got a series of webinars that we kicked off this past month that a year ago I wouldn't even envision that we would have been involved in such an aggressive repurposing of our content. So I think it's that understanding and awareness of that next generation of Fed that's coming through.
We just have a couple of minutes left before they kick us out of here for the next group, and I don't ever want to be accused of holding anybody back. All of our panelists will be available as they're exiting the room to chat with you if you have other questions. In the time we have left, I want to ask you, what are the things that you would like these folks to take back to their agencies and say, here's an idea, here's a concept that I think we can implement quickly, won't cost us a lot of money, but it'll really make an impact on how learning is done here. Al, start with you.
I would say just to, if you're considering a provider, to get them involved on the front end in more of a consultative way. Get them involved in that discussion and understanding your requirements and your training needs.
Mike, an action item for folks to take back today.
3 quick ones. Number 1, don't develop training that you can't measure the effectiveness of it. Make sure you're asking those right questions, and usually the most important one is why are we doing this, not how can we do it harder, better, something like that. And look for opportunities to collaborate with other people so that we're not all out there reinventing the wheel. There's just an unbelievably amount of talent out in the federal government right now. Figure out how you can get plugged in with the Chief Human Capital Officers Council or the CLO's Council or those other groups, and share your ideas and share your courses and all that stuff.
Pat?
I would just say to remember, I read a quote every morning from Lotso that says, "A leader is best when people barely know he exists. Not so good when they obey him, worse when they fear him. But of a good leader, when the work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say, we did it ourselves." And that's what we have to remember. When we're bringing people into that, we have to empower them to believe that they can own their own power and they can do the job, and you're going to give them the tools that they need to get the job done.
That's a terrific place to end it. I want to thank all of you for participating. Thank you to Graduate School USA for hosting us, and thank you all for coming.
You're an old pro.
Thank you very much. How was that? That's good. Thanks very much. Wonderful. Terrific. Excellent. That's great. Yeah, I would like to put some up. Great. Okay. Wonderful. Yeah, I'm going to make a little Flickr album so when people come to my site, they can Thank you. Oh, it's my pleasure. I love it. I love it. Just like always.
familiar with the website, USA Jobs?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the best place to know what's out there at any given time. I mean, you can go to the regular website, but it just links you back there because that's the official site for everything. What's important to remember, though, with GSA is that we have 11
Me? Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the session on transforming the government workplace. My name is Charlie Clark. I'm a senior correspondent with Government Executive, and I've had the pleasure of writing about this issue now for a little over a year. My colleagues with me today, we have Chuck Hardy from the General Services Administration. We have Paul Roush from the Fish and Wildlife Service. We have Larry Kirkpatrick from Computech, based in Bethesda. Okay, well, Americans like to complain about their workspaces. There's a new book out called Cubed, The Secret History of the Workplace by Nicole Savall. It says half of Americans report that their bathrooms are larger than their cubicles. He calls the 6x6 cubes that have become so common six-packs, but the author Douglas Copeland calls them veal-fattening pens. Now, you heard a little bit from Administrator Dan Tankerlini at lunchtime about what GSA has been doing in their Total Workplace Initiative. I wanted to mention that Mr. Tankerlini was inspired in part by his visit to New York City a few years ago, where he saw then-Mayor Michael Bloomberg's bullpen arrangement, which he brought from his Wall Street days. And I was pleased to report about 2 weeks ago that open office bullpen arrangement in New York City government is being continued by the new mayor, Bill de Blasio. So Dan can continue to cite that. But since we have one of the key officials with us who has been in charge of implementing the Total Workplace Initiative, Chuck Hardy, I'd like to ask him to start us off by giving us a good detailed description of it.
Okay. Total Workplace started out with working with agencies on how do you right-size your space. And by right-size, it doesn't mean 6x6. It doesn't mean 7x8. It really means figuring out what do you need to do your work. And in order to do that, that became kind of a conversation and a journey, much like we did over at our 1800F headquarters. That wasn't something where we just sat around a table one day and said, we're going to build it and this is what we're going to do. It was pilots and demonstration projects. It was learning as we moved forward. Technology helped, but I kind of say it's 10% technology and about 90% sociology. You got to figure out how people are working together. The benefit is in collaboration for those that need to collaborate. At times you need quiet. We found that out as well. So a lot of these learnings came away. And what we were looking to do, and the solution that we put forth was at our headquarters, let's try a lot of different things, learn on GSA and share those stories and share those learnings with other agencies as they embark down the same journey. Not a, give me some of that over here. It's, we like this. What's it doing for you, and will it serve these needs, and then have that conversation. So it becomes much more of a journey and a learning together than a this is the answer. I'm an architect by training, licensure, and a bunch of other things. And when I design a space back in the day, I'd expect to walk back 20 years from now and it's going to look the same way because I designed it. You don't move things. You don't move the desk. You don't do things differently. It was designed by an architect. That's got to change. And it's got to move more toward kind of like technology logic of its version 1. And what we're looking at doing now is putting in place spaces that are flexible, that are low cost, no cost changeable, and that after I do walk away as an architect and say, here's your space, 2 weeks from there when your mission changes, when you get more people, when something's not working, the space can actually adapt to that and move and address those needs. So when it's too quiet in one area or too loud in another, it can be fixed. And when I say too quiet, people say, well, what's that look like? I said, think about a library. Whispering across a library is like shouting. And that's too quiet of a space to do your work. But when you walk and you're sitting in a restaurant, you get a lot of people that are bouncing in and out of tables, very mobile. But unless you really hear or listen, you don't hear what people are talking about at that next table, unless you really concentrate. So I do that sometimes. But when you do it, you can hear it. But if not, if you're having your own conversation, nobody else is listening to you. That needs to translate into the workplace.
Very nice. So, Paul, the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service has been one of several agencies that are ahead of the others in implementing this open office arrangement. Can you fill us in on where it stands there?
Yes. I'm with Fish and Wildlife Service, and about a year ago, we knew our leases, well, we knew longer than that, but about a year ago, we started planning for our leases expiring at the end of September of this year. And we knew we had to make a transition out of the traditional, mostly traditional office environment where we have about 75% private offices and about 25% workstations. You know, our employees tend to love that. Most people have a private office. But as between budget issues and mandates to reduce federal space, we knew we weren't going to be able to recreate that. It's also more expensive to build that out than to have the more efficient space. So what we've tried to do is look at, when Chuck talked about the sociology of our employees, we tried to take a hard look at that initially, see how our employees were working, see what they need to do on a day-to-day basis. As I said, I work for Fish and Wildlife Service. We have a lot of scientists. We have a lot of people that are writing regulations, that are reviewing permits, that are doing that type of work, quiet heads down work. But we also have a collaborative aspect to our work. So what we've tried to do, to the best of our ability, is to hit that sweet spot between efficiency and employee privacy, collaborative work and heads down work, and design a space that meets that. I don't know if any of you saw this, but a while back, Gensler, the architecture firm, put out a report dealing with that specific topic. Just by coincidence, they happened to be the architect on our project, and we really worked with them closely to try to get that right mix. We haven't moved into the new space yet, so I don't know if we've hit the mark or not. I'm the point person for our agency on this project, and so with employees, I'm frankly viewed as public enemy number one many times, because I'm the one that's making them move out of their fairly large private office into a workstation in many cases. But I'm hoping that once they get into that space, I know it's going to be a transition for them, but I'm really hoping that they can begin to appreciate some of the thought and effort that went into making sure that we have the acoustics right on this building. We spent a lot of time and effort thinking about that. That's one of the big complaints and concerns about being in open workstation environments, is it's too loud. You know, the conference call going on next to you is interrupting your heads down work. So we've really tried to make sure that there is adequate meeting space. If someone has a conference call they need to get onto and it needs to be on speakerphone, they can slide into one of these places so they're not disturbing their neighbors. And when they go into a meeting room or a small huddle room or whatever it is, we've spent a lot of time and thought and effort thinking about the acoustics of that room so that you're not hearing that conversation when you're outside of that room. And that's all hidden from the employees, but if it wasn't there, they would sure notice it. So we put a lot of effort into that. Time will tell. We're going to be moving at the end of July or sometime in July to the new space. And I think in reality, some of our employees are excited about it. In reality, some of them will be dragged kicking and screaming out of their private offices. And I get that. I understand it. If I was in that situation, and it would be very difficult for me as well. So I get it, but hopefully we're somewhere near that sweet spot of what I talked about between the balancing efficiency and employee privacy and collaborative and heads down work. But we'll see here pretty soon.
Very good. Well, Larry, you're here as a representative of both the private sector and the IT world in particular. So I'd love to hear whether you feel this has caught on, this open office space, and does it have a bright future?
You know, from the technology world, design of space has been studied for a pretty long time, and there's been a taffy pull between throw everybody in a big working space together and everybody gets a private office. And I think it's settled out in kind of an interesting space, an interesting sense, the way these two gentlemen have described that they're working on it. The private sector has an interesting dynamic where they're driven by a profit motive, and so what tends to drive the conversation there is productivity. So can we design a space that is going to maximize the productivity of our workforce? And that means that not one size fits all. It depends on the kind of the work that you're doing. It depends on the nature of the culture of the organization. It also depends on your financial picture and where you are. For instance, if you've ever been in a startup, sometimes 2 milk crates in a closet are all you can afford. But the reality is this productivity metric really has to be key. And if you look at some of the leading companies who've looked at this, like Pixar or Google, they've settled out onto a formula which seems to be fairly common and echoed in what you heard here, which is a lot more common space than you might think, because you want people to bump into each other on their way to and from food, to and from the restroom, to and from fresh air, to and from somebody else's office. But private offices for heads down concentration work, and those private offices, people don't always get their own private office. The trend seems to be 2, maybe 3 people sharing in an office as opposed to 1 in an office. You get the quiet you need, you get the privacy you need, but you get some space efficiency out of that as well. I think that at the end of the day, when you start looking at the numbers at the bottom, certain people have studied it. For instance, UC Irvine found there was a 30% decrease in productivity using bullpen layouts. So I think it's nice to hear these two gentlemen saying we're not advocating bullpens, we're advocating designing a space that works for the employees. So when you hear bullpen, let that little alarm bell go off. One last point I'll make is that it doesn't have to be office either. A few years back, AT&T in New Jersey did a study of 600 workers where they allowed teleworking. They actually found a 20% increase in productivity of the workers while a massive decrease in facilities cost. So I think what I'd caution is the word from the private sector is really focus on the productivity dimension, right? Because at the end of the day, most of us are spending 40, 50, sometimes more hours a week there. Our waking hours, the best hours of a day, it ought to be a great place to go.
Very good. Well, I come from the newsroom environment, and it used to be a lot noisier in the old days when there was teletype machines and clacking typewriters. Well, now it's pretty silent, and reporters and editors are used to hearing each other's making doctor's appointments and talking about their children's problems in schools. But let's talk about noise a little bit. I know that the chance collaboration, the chance overhearing of an idea from somebody with a slightly different specialty is one of the examples of the advantages of being in close quarters. And of course, as they've mentioned, if you need privacy, there are rooms. You can arrange it. But let's talk about noise for a second. What's being done to mitigate the problems with noise?
I think a couple things. One is, and again, our headquarters and other workplace engagements we've been on, you start to design the space almost like city planning. You have residential zones, you have industrial zones, you have entertainment zones, and they take on a space of their own. So think of a floor plan that way, where there are quiet areas of that floor plan, there are more collaborative areas, there's louder areas, and start to plan and bring that kind of logic. In our headquarters building where we have 80% unassigned, people say, well, how does that work? How do I even know where to find somebody? There's still hubs and neighborhoods of the different offices within the organization, so whether it's the public or the visitors, there's a place to go. Once you start figuring out how do you segregate that, it becomes a choice of an employee, and that really enables, at the very base level of the organization, a feeling of empowerment. If I can now choose 80% of the seats in this building of where I want to sit this day to do what I need to do, I'm getting value out of that. And from that value, I'm going to be more productive because I don't have to sit next to Paul because Paul talks a lot. And today I need to be next to Charles because he doesn't. And so I'm going to do that, and I can pick out the seat I do and become more productive. When you get to the technology side, the simple metric I say is I can schedule a meeting right now for tomorrow. In the past, I couldn't. It would be, well, I'm not here, I'm not there that day, I can't do this. Now it's a webinar, it's telepresence, it's a phone call. There's about 50 different ways we can have a meeting and do it on everybody's time. That's inherently productive. And so you start looking at all that kind of stuff, and yes, there's pros and cons. You'll read about all this of what's good, what's bad. But when it gets to noise, bad noise is bad design. If you're in a space that isn't open and it's very noisy, that's just poor design, but don't let that stop you from putting in place good design and good solutions to do it.
You guys want to add to that? Or?
I would just say that we took a slightly different tact in our space. One of the compromises that we felt we needed to make for our employees and try to hit that sweet spot was we don't have employees have an assigned space. So they do, but our compromise, it's not quite as efficient from a space utilization standpoint, but what we've done is tried to include many of those and well-spaced private spaces where they can go into, whether that's a small conference room, whether it's what we call a huddle room, which is like a two-person and a quiet room. And then in the actual design, we've tried to make sure that the acoustics are addressed so that there's, between the type of ceiling tile we use, there's a sound masking system in the building, there's special insulation, it's slab-to-slab construction in front of the offices so sound doesn't penetrate over the top. So we've really tried to take that into account. But there will be noisy activities in certain instances going on next to quiet work activities, and that's what we've tried to overcome with some architecture features, but to a certain extent. And frankly, it also has to come down. There's going to have to be some new etiquette among the employees about how they interact and how they work on a daily basis.
There's been a practice in the restaurant industry for a couple of decades now. I don't know if you may have noticed this already. You may notice it going forward. certain restaurants pipe in a lot of noise as a distraction, and what it does is it drives turnover, so they seat more people and they sell more. So that should tell you something about how effective noise and interruptions and distractions are. The UC Irvine study I mentioned earlier, you should go take a look if you really care about this stuff. The cost of an interruption is phenomenal. I mean, the time it takes to get your head back into concentrated work after an interruption is 25 minutes. So a few interruptions a day can blow a day if you're doing very serious heads down work. So I think the issue really has to be when people need to do concentrated stuff, they need places where they can be in quiet areas, and the bullpen style just doesn't do it under almost any circumstances.
Good numbers you're giving. Now, a related but slightly different issue is privacy. I imagine that in some of these discussions of etiquette and getting people oriented, some people may be embarrassed if there's an emotional discussion going on, or if two people are kind of feuding, and if there's all this body language, all sorts of visuals that didn't used to be when everybody was in a separate area. Is there any issues around that? Do people feel like they're on display all the time?
I think it's the same issues, just a different variety of them. You will have the office blow-ups, whether it's an open office or whether you have cubicles. It does become a different protocol of how people have conversations. Some have argued in open offices, while you're arguing that it's more transparent and open, it really becomes even stronger backdoor conversations because it is open and transparent. You got to go someplace else to have that conversation. So it can go either way, but at the end of the day, the office really doesn't change. I mean, you're not going to change people by putting in a 6x8 cubicle or an office. People are going to be people. If there were issues before, there will be issues again, maybe different issues, and you have to evolve with those. And so when it is the loud talker in the office realizing he's a loud talker and has to go someplace else to talk, it's the person that is a little more aggressive saying, I just noticed everybody in the office is looking at me when I get aggressive. I better think about that. So it's all those kind of things of the learnings that go on. It's just, to me, I think it's just a different learning. It's not necessarily driven by the space.
Well, let me ask you this. If the top boss is sitting there in the middle of the room and job seekers or lobbyists or people from other agencies or the other cabinet officials, celebrities come in, does the whole room take note?
No, and I'll use the pictures you saw at lunch from where Administrator Tangolini sits. There's constantly people touring the building, people coming in. He'll have a press conference right next to his desk. It doesn't disrupt the rest of the office. It goes back to that restaurant logic of people just continue to do what they do. If it becomes normal enough, people don't freeze. I mean, some say it's like a zoo. People are touring it so much that you feel like you're on watch. But you get used to it, and you just continue. They're not bugging me. They're not coming to talk to me, so I can just continue to work. And so it is that learning, and it takes time. There was an office in Chicago we did where we had what was at the time called shower stalls, smaller offices, glass fronts. And for the first 3 weeks of that space, people felt the need when they walked by an office to wave at the person. And the person in the office had to wave back. You had to. And if they didn't wave, they'd knock on it and wave. And that lasted for about 3 weeks. And people said, why are we doing this? And then they stopped waving, and the guy stopped waving back, and life went on. But it's those things that you go through.
Good detail there. Well, there's another issue which I would call the status issue. The New York Times Sunday business section has a column called The Corner Office. And it's usually an interview with the CEO about his or her secrets to success. And I'm wondering, the corner office, I think I quoted John Palgudo of the Partnership for Public Service saying that when he joined the government in the 60s, having a corner office was a huge sign that you had arrived. And under this open office arrangement, that may be a thing of the past. Is that an issue for people?
I'll jump in on that one first. For us, I've been talking about compromise in the sweet spot here for us, and I'm speaking for us, but we did not give up all the private offices. Our supervisors do have a private office. It's smaller than what they're in now. We've moved them off the window walls so that they're not blocking the daylight view. They're not blocking the view for the rest of the employees. They're on the core wall of the building. So that was one of our compromises to allow for that privacy and to allow for that. And it is a little bit of a status symbol, but everybody knows who the supervisors are anyways. So that's, but they do in theory, have to have more private conversations with staff, performance evaluations, performance discussions, all those type of things. So that brings it into an office where they can shut the door and have that conversation. We do have the glass front on that office. But we also have a privacy band on it, so hopefully you might be able to see if somebody's in there, but you're not going to make eye contact with them as you're walking by.
Oh, that's well done.
And as was mentioned this morning in the generational conversation, there's a shift in the business and in the workplace where people are getting the energy out of what it is they're doing. And certainly in government sector, we're here because of service. And so there's a certain calling that goes with the job. Now with that, you know, as people migrate up the ranks of 12 to 13 to 14 to 15 to SES, that is their status. That has been, and through history, that's kind of been laid out as their status. The 10-year awards, the 20-year awards, the pin for this, the pin for that. And we have to kind of take a look at that and say, from people my age, the answer is, what legacy am I leaving behind in the next generation of government leaders? And that becomes kind of where that is. And those coming up saying, how can I, as a 30-something in NASA, contribute to a man on the moon kind of thing? That changes, and it's that kind of conversation. There will always be people out there that feel real estate drives their position, but it's just the right thing to do, and the correct and the proper leadership is taking a strong look at how does that do that. You saw, you know, our administrator, third largest administrator's office in D.C. We inherited it from Interior, Teapot Dome scandal in it. A lot of history, and here's a guy that, you know, this is your office, to say no, this is wasteful. I don't need this.
It's a training session.
Right,
now, yeah.
right. I don't need this. I can be out here and do that because, oh, by the way, most of the time I'm in meetings like this or I'm going out and visiting some. I'm never in my office anyway, so why keep that real estate?
Well, let me describe something and get Larry to react. When I toured the GSA renovated headquarters, they show me lockers that people can sign up for electronically, and when you're traveling or telecommuting and then you reserve a desk and you come in, this is under the hoteling, people can transfer their children's pictures and their you know, doodads and trinkets, and they get I guess a cart to haul it on. So do you, in a startup or in an IT company, would that kind of practice be accepted?
Sometimes you see that in the beginning where things are unsettled and nobody knows where anybody's going to be or who's going to be there, frankly. But over time, it usually settles out. People have a need for a space, a place. They need to have a need to personalize that space. And if that helps them get into the zone 15 minutes faster in terms of being productive and doing their work, then it probably bears out on the cost side. I'd like to come back to that for a second. When we look at running our own business, the cost of space is literally 10 to 12% of the cost of the employee. So if you can actually drive a 20% productivity increase in an employee by giving them a little bit of privacy or a little bit more space, does it really matter at the end of the day that, that you're spending more on facilities? And I think it's tough to turn the situation around because I know people have building budgets and they need to look at their building budget and need to stay in scope. But I really think it helps look at the whole where we say, what are we trying to get out of this from a productivity perspective? The guy in the corner office, is he more productive if he's got a little bit more space where he can entertain people in private, where he can do various work functions, call a department in, have a conversation, versus not? So I think we really need to come back and look at the big picture as opposed to, you know, bullpens are great, offices are bad, offices are great, bullpens are bad. We really need to look at it in terms of the numbers of productivity, right? What makes a great place to work, what makes people productive, contributing members of the organization. One of the things we've noticed is that a lot of times when you drive up productivity, you can do a lot more with a lot fewer people, which means if we can get 2x productivity out of a team, we need half the people, which means we need half the space. So there's another way to actually save the space argument as opposed to counting square feet.
Very interesting. Well, Chuck, can you reiterate some of the macro savings?
Yeah, I mean, just on headquarters alone, we collapsed 6 leases into our headquarters building. It used to house 2,200. We now have 3,300 assigned, and targeted for 4,400 is what it's currently designed for. And we have 6,600 employees in the D.C. area that hopefully at some point would like to get them into the building. It is focused on the employee and the productivity associated with it, and not just how many federal workers can we cram into a building. And so it's that It's that slow growth and those slow learnings. But that simple math was, okay, $24 million in the 6 leases we collapsed because we're paying this much for our headquarters building. But then came some of those unintended benefits that we found out was we no longer have to carry the shared services we were carrying for 6 different locations. Paul's offices are collapsing 3 leases into one. You're not carrying the security. You're not carrying the deliveries. You're not carrying the duplicate supply centers. You can bring those into a location. For our headquarters building, that was $7 million a year. So between the two of just the space appropriate use, and if you tour the space, and again, I encourage you to go over there, it's not packed. People aren't sitting in every desk. We still have vacancy there, and we're at a 2-to-1 desk ratio over there. And so we've got the space. That's what 141 per person looks like, is what our headquarters building is. And so it's not evil. If done appropriately, it can be good. But it's that balance. It's that choice. It's not saying nobody gets an office. It's not saying everybody's got to be benching. It's really listening to it and providing that flexibility. And so that's kind of the balance. The numbers enter in. I don't like talking numbers much because then people think it is. If you talk to the CFOs, yeah, I'll talk numbers because it makes sense to them. But when you really talk to the workforce, it's what do you need to get your job done? Because I can tell you right now, there's some GS9s and 11s and 7s out there that have far too less space for what they're doing, and GS15s that have far too great space for what they're doing. And somehow that's got to balance. And then you overlay, just one last note, mobility into it. I'm assigned to Chicago. I'm a headquarters employee. I actually report to DC. I'm here on a state. What am I doing right now? Am I teleworking? Am I mobile working? Am I working? I'm working. So it really doesn't matter anymore. You work.
Yeah. So we just have about 2 more minutes. I want to make sure everybody can speak once more. But maybe talk about, are there any examples you can think of collaborative success where somebody overheard an idea from somebody who doesn't even work in their division and said, hey, we could apply that here? Any sort of 4-leaf clover?
For us, it'll be TBD because we're not in the space yet. But
Yeah.
I'm hoping that happens, so I'll defer to someone else.
Not on my record. I think ideas have a way of percolating, and they emerge in conversation and dialogue. And so if you look at best practices in terms of designing spaces for organizations that focus on creativity and innovation, they allow for the frequent interaction of people within the space. And I think there was a study from, again, programmers, they like to study each other. Or themselves. There was a study a few years back that found that 120 feet was equivalent to offshore, right? If you were 120 feet away from another programmer, you might as well be halfway around the world interacting electronically because you just didn't interact that much. So I think it's nice to hear the architects speak. If you can design spaces where people are going to interact frequently, it helps.
And a simple win for us was the Total Workplace program that we're doing, which helps agencies fund up front furniture and IT to get your operations right-sized. We work it back through a lease. Fish and Wildlife are using it, but that came about because PBS, who delivers space, FAST, who buys furniture and IT, and the GSA, which is the umbrella organization that signs into place the spending plans and all those, we're now sitting in the same room. That program stood up in 3 months, and and it's going through OMB, having discussions, figuring out which fund you're going to get it from, how does it work, what rules, what authorities, and that's because PBS, FAST, and GSA were for the first time in their existence in the same building, sitting on the same floor, that you could just yell across saying, hey, I'm having some trouble getting this to the CFO's office, what's the issue? Talk it out, and boom, you're done. And in 3 months to stand up a program as game-changing as Total Workplace has been for right-sizing our operations speaks to the collaboration that happens.
Very good. So let's end with a quick prediction. In 10 years, will the Total Workplace Initiative be still in place and have spread widely? Yes, no?
I say yes,
Yeah.
just because of being a customer of it, one of the first customers. We couldn't have made this transition without it. We did it in a difficult budget time, and we were able to roll the savings we got out of our lease into building out and furnishing the space.
Very good. Larry?
Yes, because people care about where they spend their day, and there's always a tension between that and money.
And I'd say yes because it's the right thing to do, and it'll be probably even far more extreme than we even think it today.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I hope that worked out for you all, too.
Thanks. You too. Thanks, Chuck.
Yeah, that was good.
Nice meeting you, Chuck. Good job.